and some of you may remember me only as Geco Reunion had its stirrings back in February of this year when I raised the topic while in conversation with another ex-Gecoite, Dolores Littlejohn. Dolores was very excited about and receptive to the idea. We then enlisted two others to form a committee of four, Jacqueline Woolman, Ann Muster, Dolores Littlejohn, and I, all of whom ex-Gecoites. For several weeks, there was a flurry of emails shunted back and forth among us. Sadly, Dolores, aged 60, passed away very suddenly on May 25th, a first and major heart attack. It stunned us remaining three committee members to the core. Dolores was so very excited about this reunion and contributing whatever she could in making it nothing short of a complete success. She was an idea person and extremely organized. It was Dolores' suggestion that the reunion be held here at the Embers in the grounds of Old Geco. This is a very busy establishment and bookings must be placed well in advance. Dolores knew this, and at the beginning of March, she sent me an urgent email which read, "The room is available now, but they are booking quickly for early September. Please advise." She secured this room for us on March the 5th. My sister, Eileen Spicer, volunteered to take Dolores' place on the committee, and she has been a great help. Sister here, Eileen. Over the months, we have shared the workload to get the job done and to see this day come to successful fruition. None of us on the committee is a professional organizer, but we have done our best to make this a happy and memorable occasion for all of you today. Could I request that the other three members please stand? You've already done that, Eileen. And Jacqueline Woolman has not arrived yet, so the other member would be Ann Muster. Thank you. So there has been some last moment scurrying about, and you may notice a few glitches here and there as the afternoon progresses. We already have a glitch. We're a little bit short time here. Please forgive us for these. But overall, we are confident that you will enjoy yourselves and delight in meeting with the old gang and listening to the music popular during our youth. It has been many, many years. We have scheduled a few events for the afternoon. My daughter, Mrs. Tracy Evans, and her husband, Michael, will present a comprehensive speech on the history of the wartime conditions, and I ask you to listen closely. You'll find it very interesting. And this should be very enlightening for those of you who are one way or another associated with Geco. And Mrs. Mavis Thornton of Mentor, Ohio, will share some of her memories of more than a half a century ago when she was a young teacher known to her students as Miss Evans. And please stand up, Miss Evans. Stubbs has also graciously offered to share some of her, could I have your attention please? Mrs. Ann Stubbs has also graciously offered to share some of her memories of long ago when she was an employee at the huge Geco plant. Mrs. Ann Stubbs, please stand up. Former Geco. We have her husband stand too, please, because today is their 60th wedding anniversary. And we also have here today several volunteers and my colleagues from the Oshawa Pickering Dance Club who will present a demonstration for your enjoyment. And we're all very nervous about this. Maybe not the instructors, but okay, their contribution to this event is very much appreciated. And later in the afternoon, Mrs. Dottie Jackson will sing and play a few tunes on the keyboard, which I'm sure we will all thoroughly enjoy. She and her ex-Gecoite husband, Bill Jackson, now reside in Florida. Can we have Dottie Jackson stand up, please? Where are you, Dottie? Right there. Of course, among all these activities, our DJ, Mr. Steve Secchi over there, reading the comic books, will keep us entertained with the tunes of our youth. There are several of you in the audience who have traveled a considerable distance by air and by road. Chip Q here, Stewie Richardson of New Brunswick, George and Doris Leddington from Nanaimo, BC, Miss Evans from Mentor, Ohio, and some of the ladies coming down from Mount Porch. Just wonderful. So, we are extremely pleased and grateful that you could make it. So now, that's enough of my blabbing about here. At this time, I'd like to call to the microphone Michael and Tracy Stanley. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. We'd like to welcome you to the Geco Reunion of 2002. My name is Michael Stanley.
My name is Tracy Stanley. I am daughter of former Gecoite Warren Evans, whom some of you knew only as Corky during your Geco days, as my father has already mentioned. The name Geco is an acronym for the General Engineering Company, a large and thriving corporation based in Salt Lake City, Utah in the 1930s. So then, how did an American firm come to be associated with this remote area of Scarborough, Ontario, Canada? For the answer to this, we must allow our minds to travel back in time to England, 1940, during the very early and bleak days of World War II. Hitler and his mob had already blitzkrieged through Denmark, Norway, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Belgium. Then France, the one country deemed capable of stopping the Germans in their tracks, was totally defeated in May-June of 1940. France could now be used as a stepping stone to invade Great Britain. As a softening up procedure in preparation for a planned invasion by land, Germany assaulted England, especially London, with devastating around-the-clock bombing raids. But the Germans underestimated the morale and steadfastness of the British nation, particularly under the gritty leadership of Britain's new Prime Minister, Winston Churchill. In itself, however, high morale and gritty leadership were puny weapons at best against the overwhelming military might of the equally determined German nation. More than anything else in those initial stages of war, the Brits needed a continuous and uninterrupted supply of all manner of arms. The growing frequency of air raids and necessary blackout conditions constantly interrupted and slowed the manufacture of desperately needed arms and munitions. England was in deep trouble. In one of his famous speeches, Winston Churchill made an urgent plea for tools of war. At that time, the United States was still a neutral nation. Nevertheless, the U.S. Congress immediately approved aid in the form of a Lend-Lease program. In no time flat, disguised merchant ships left out from a quiet bay in the state of New Jersey to begin the hazardous return trip to the arsenal of the British Isles. Of course, England's Commonwealth countries, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada responded in kind. The Canadian government, under Prime Minister William Lyon Mackenzie King, offered to construct 2 new major munitions plants and to begin shipping as soon as possible vast caches of ready-to-fire arms to the Allies in war-torn Europe. Apart from its armed forces, which were already fighting overseas, there was no greater and significant contribution Canada could have made. The first plant would be built on a particular site in Bouchard in the province of Quebec. Construction began at once. The second, more complex and larger plant was yet to begin. This plant, proposed to be of unprecedented production in Canada when in full operation, would be built somewhere in the proximity to the city of Toronto to draw on its labor force. On December 10, 1940, the quest for a suitable site began in earnest. Government scouts scoured thousands of prime acres of countryside in the outskirts east, west, and north of Toronto. Meanwhile, the government hired a reputable American-based company, General Engineering, to undertake this momentous task of constructing the Dominion's most major shell-filling plant. Engineers and company heads Robert Hamilton and his younger brother Peter would oversee the construction and subsequent operation of the plant. Until a suitable site was found, they busied themselves consulting with some of America's foremost ordnance experts in an effort to correlate the best shell-filling plant designs as used in Great Britain with those of the United States. The Hamilton brothers knew that as soon as a site was found, They had to be ready to start construction in a moment's notice. Time was not altogether on anybody's side during those early and bloody days of World War II. It could not be frittered away. At the beginning of January 1941, government scouts finally located a suitable site in Scarborough Township, near the eastern limits of Toronto. Unanimously, all parties involved saw it as ideal. Transmission lines of the Hydroelectric Power Commission were conveniently nearby, and Canadian National Railways could feasibly run short spur lines into the property. Acting on behalf of the Crown, the Real Estate Department of Allied War Supplies Corporation at once undertook expropriation of the required property. Before the end of January 41, His Majesty the King and Right of Canada acquired the site from 7 different proprietors. In its final form, it consisted of 358 acres, extending 4,500 feet south from existing Eglinton Avenue and bounded on the east by Birchmount Road and on the west by Warden Avenue, a wraparound, enterprising and long-standing farm area. By this time, the General Engineering Company, with brothers Robert and Peter Hamilton at the helm, had done its own homework, also in record time, and was poised for action. Technically complex blueprints, barely dry with ink, were ready to be doled out to the various trades in the field. And yet, the war raged on in Europe. There was no time to lose. On February 6, 1941, the first fleet of bulldozers and other heavy earth-moving machines pushed their blades and buckets into the frozen and barren fields. To assist, the project engineers made the decision to begin blasting the frozen ground with dynamite. Daily, and in all sections of the 358 acres, tall plumes of earth hurtled into the frigid air. By the beginning of March, floodlights were set up and around-the-clock shift work began. Due to war conditions, non-availability or delayed delivery of construction materials resulted in snap decisions being made for such changes and innovations as no window construction for the filling shops and construction of laminated wooden beams instead of steel. If we look above our heads, we will see these laminated wooden beams because this Emperor's Banquet Hall, in which we have gathered today, is one of the original historical Geco buildings. All necessary improvisations were made on the spot. Construction progress peaked in the month of June 41 at an average wage of 80 cents per hour, and in the final run, a total of 2 million man-hours would be required to complete the project. Geco was 100% completed by the beginning of December 41. The total expenditure for labor, machinery, equipment, buildings, and so on was $7,182,000, a lot of money in 1941. The complex was comprised of 172 buildings with an overall floor area of 790,000 square feet. The buildings were connected by a series of galleries raised 2 feet above the ground and having a combined length of 16,000 feet, through which workers could move and munitions quickly carted. Not visible from any possible overhead enemy aircraft was a vast labyrinth of underground tunnels with a total linear length of 14,000 feet. Now, for the metric-minded among us, which includes me, that's close to 5 kilometers of tunnel, one slice of which runs through the entire length of this former Geco building, right under our feet. My brother Dean, his wife Maureen, Michael, and I have recently been down in this section of tunnels, and we were very impressed. They are very big. Eventually, up to 6,000 employees, mostly young women, were fingerprinted, photographed, and assigned to a wide variety of duties. Work began on a 24-hour non-stop rotating shift basis. Tons of all manner of shells, fuses, and tracers were assembled and loaded with highly combustible powders, to be sure a potentially very dangerous operation. They were then hastily crated and shipped on their way to the front lines in war-ravaged Europe. But Geco was more than just a place for wartime employment for the Allied cause. It had been designed, built, and would be operated as a mini-city. The administration building, also known as Building 1, housed the main switchboard for the complex, which at its peak had 13 trunk lines and 240 local numbers, and with a volume of calls averaging 50,000 per week. One of the largest buildings was set up for use as the company's cafeteria, called the Canteen. In no time, they were serving an average of 1,000 meals per half hour, and at its peak, it would reach a demand of 65,000 meals per month. It was an operation unto itself. Building 86 became Geco's new medical building, complete with an ambulance, 5 full-time physicians, and 12 nurses. Any injuries, illnesses, and so on would be attended to on the site. Like the canteen, they too must have been very busy, with up to 1,500 visits made by alien employees each week. Because this huge and new shell-filling plant was physically separated from Toronto proper and deemed out in the sticks, many unusual amenities were in place for the employees. For example, monthly dances were held, chiefly in the canteen, with an average attendance of between 800 to 1,000 persons. Across Eglinton Avenue, in the empty fields north of the complex, Victory Gardens were set up for the exclusive and free use of Geco's employees. In that first full summer of operation in 1942, no less than 510 Green Thumb employees availed themselves of this company-offered, very unique diversion. Plant picnics also became very popular, with turnouts averaging 500 employees and their families. Feelings of camaraderie were at their highest during such happy get-togethers. But these folk were not working on shift just to make ends meet. They had another motive, a war to win, the biggest war in the history of mankind. Battles raged on in Europe. From the daily news reports in all of the major newspapers, Canadians were given no reason to be optimistic for an early end to war. Losses on both sides, Axis and Allies, were now numbering in the hundreds of thousands. To be sure, Geco was doing its fair share for the war effort. Production on a 24-hour basis never slowed or slacked. It was a gigantic effort by a veritable horde of dedicated workers. It was full steam ahead. Daily, by rail or by road to waiting ships, thousands of ready-to-fire shells were on their way to Europe. The workers had all the incentive they needed, because to contemplate the German Empire eventually invading the shores of Canada was a frightening prospect indeed, and never a remote possibility in mid-1943. For the remainder of that year and into the next, plant production at Geco was at an all-time high. Slowly, over the next 2 years, the Allied victories outnumbered those of the Axis powers. The once seemingly invincible might of the German Empire had withered to an unrecoverable point. On May 7, 1945, Nazi Germany unconditionally surrendered. The European phase of World War II had come to an end. With this most welcome news, production, which had remained constant until that final day, ceased at once and forever at the Geco plant. The need for arms and weapons of destruction were gone. A Canadian wartime legacy in rural Scarborough, Ontario ended. But I should mention at this point that plant production had been interrupted only once, and then only by the whim of Mother Nature. On December 12, 1944, a record amount of snow fell in most regions of southern Ontario. My father, Warren, a young boy living in the area of High Park at that time, vividly remembers this storm as many others here will. And he believes that this record snowfall still stands today. It virtually shut down the city of Toronto. The entire Geco plant became hopelessly snowbound, and 1,500 employees were unable to return to their homes in the city, and the ship to follow was unable to leave the city. That evening, and only that one time, there was more whooping it up than work performed at the Geco plant. On July 31st, 45, the last issue of Geco's magazine, called the Geco Facilier, was distributed to the employees. An article under the heading 30, the newspaper symbol for the end, read as follows. Michael.
It is with mingled feelings of regret and gratitude that we write 30. Regret for the breaking of ties with as fine a body of people as we ever hoped to associate with. Gratitude that the thread of everything we hold dear has been withdrawn and the urgent necessity to fashion weapons of death no longer exists. Now we can turn back to thoughts and plans for ultimate peace. Those of us who will continue to work and help make or do things that are constructive rather than destructive, things that make for people's comfort and happiness. There is a staggering amount of constructive work to be done both in material and a spiritual sense. Perhaps if all of us who form Scarborough's proud company take with us into our new spheres of endeavor the same spirit of loyalty, the same determination to safeguard the things we work so hard for in the plant, and the same Scarborough will never die. The tradition, outgrowth of the tragedy of war will live on, a vibrant, shining thing through the happier years of peace to come. Long live Scarborough. So, till we meet again, so long.
Thus, with those final words printed in the facilier, the gate to a magnificent wartime munitions plant, Geco, closed. In the final analysis, total production from the inception of Canada's most major shell-filling plant in July 41 until its demise in July 45, over 250 million units were prepared and shipped to the military overseas. This then was Geco's successful and admirable response to Winston Churchill's urgent plea for tools of war. As we should expect, most of Geco's former employees have passed on. But on this day, September 8, 2002, more than 61 years after that first group of employees clocked in at the spanking new Geco plant, we are honored to have with us several ladies and gentlemen who represent those thousands of once upon a time young and energetic workers. In their youth, they toiled diligently and faithfully for those plant workers who are able, please stand while we give you a long round of overdue applause of appreciation. Oh, sorry, I'm tapping the microphone. I was so excited. Thank you, and on to Michael.
Here then ends the story of Canada's most successful contributions to the Empire during World War II. But the name Geco and the original complex remained, although for the moment deserted. Late in 1945, the entire complex was cleaned up and desensitized. That is to say, tons of deadly powder residues were removed and destroyed by burning. Geco was then turned over to the War Assets Department of the federal government to be made available for citizen use. During the war years, quite unlike today, most families did not own their own homes in which they lived. At the war's end, there were thousands of such families across the nations who found themselves virtually homeless. This was due in part to the influx of thousands of returning soldiers and military personnel. It was rather a squeeze play, and something had to give. Across Toronto, several communities were set up to accommodate these floundering families. Most notable among these communities were Long Branch, Stanley Barracks, and in particular in the heart of Toronto, behind Old Maple Leaf Gardens, Little Norway, at the foot of Bathurst Street. There may be some of you in the audience today who resided in Old Little Norway, who were frequent visitors to Geco. Could we please ask you to show your hands? We welcome you. In the spring of 1946, a cluster of the former Geco munitions buildings were renovated and ready to receive the first group of those families who desperately needed emergency housing. It would be a harsh uprooting for all those first Geco families. Tracy's father, who aged 11 at the time, was among that initial group. With his parents, 3 sisters, and 2 brothers, he moved from the west end of Toronto directly into Geco Building number 3. The Getty family, who many of you here today will remember, had also moved into the same building only weeks earlier. Years later, one of the sons, Don Getty, would become a famous Edmonton Eskimo quarterback, Minister of Energy for Alberta, and then the Premier of Alberta. By the end of the summer 1946, Geco had its first 2-room schoolhouse, the former medical building for the Geco plant, which would soon be known as the Yellow School, because of its creamy yellow exterior. In September 1946, 13 rather nervous kids were called to class for the first time in this strange and isolated place, Geco, out in the boondocks of Scarborough, and Tracy's father was among them. By the end of the following year, 1947, 11 separate buildings relegated for emergency wartime housing were now fully occupied. Some 2,000 citizens all sharing the same fate, as it were. This Embers Banquet Hall that we're in today is one of those original family-occupied buildings. By January 1948, Geco had a total of 4 individual schoolhouses within the community. Visually grocery store called the Blind Man's, a post office, and 2 adjoining very large recreation halls with such activities as weekly dances, floor hockey, boxing, wrestling, chess tournaments, cards, and so on. Conveniently left behind from the days of demolition plants were a few baseball diamonds in the vast empty fields on the north side of Eglinton, and these would see plenty of use. At this time in 1948, there were 3, in particular, enterprising farms in operation which had survived the government's expropriation process 6 years earlier. Tom Hayes Farm on the east side of Warden Avenue, 1/4 mile north of Eglinton. Atkinson's Farm at the northwest corner of Birchmount and Eglinton. And McGregor's beautiful farm and orchards on the east side of Birchmount, just south of Eglinton. I have trouble picturing all these farms when I drive down here myself. Although essentially a pig-raising farm, McGregor's Farm was particularly noted for its lush Montmorency cherry tree orchards, black and red currants, gooseberries, and raspberries. Many Gecoites in the audience today will have earned a few coins at McGregor's picking berries and cherries there during the summer months. To be sure, Tracy's father did. These 3 farms were wonderful playgrounds for many of the children of Geco. Within comfortable walking distance from the community was Clay Banks, which was ultimately called Bare Ass Beach because of its accessible skinny dippers. This very popular swimming hole was located on the east branch of the Don River in the area today of the Don Valley Parkway in Eglinton. Because Geco was out in the sticks and far removed from any police force, they formed their own governing law and order body known as Geco Old Boys, a few members of whom had been frontline soldiers and officers in Europe during World War II. They were the elected police of Geco, responsible not only for the safekeeping of the citizens in the community, but also for organizing all formal sports and recreational functions within the community. It was now a thriving, rather self-sufficient, close-knit community with citizens from many backgrounds who pooled their skills and talents to pull together to make the best of things. Tracy's father has told me that for him there was never a lack of things to do in Geco. There was always some fun event underway, such as floor hockey, baseball, quoits, horseshoes, organized dances, outdoor sing-alongs and amateur nights under the stars, dog races at Hayes Farm north of the community, hay rides offered by local farmers, and a horse riding stable called 3 Gates on Warden Avenue, just south of where the Embers restaurant now stands. On April 29, 1947, Geco's post office had opened for business. On April 29, 1954, exactly 7 years to the day, it had permanently closed. The last remaining families began to move, and this once unique and thriving community of Geco ceased to exist. Back in the 40s, and really not all that long ago, this was a very rural and rustic area. Eglinton Avenue was a 2-lane hard dirt road with few vehicles and with farmers hauling their hay atop horse-drawn wagons. Today, in 2002, this is one of the busiest and most commercial areas of Scarborough. If Hitler had not started World War II and Winston Churchill had not made that urgent plea for tools of war, then no doubt Geco would never have existed, nor this building we're in today. Could we please have a show of hands for all those who lived in the former community of Geco, and their children if they're here today. Ladies and gentlemen, please revel in your memories and enjoy this historic reunion. Thank you very much.